Guam to conduct a training. Is it loud? Okay, great. Okay. I was in Arizona for a conference. I had just been asked if I would go to Guam and conduct a training for some military wives who were going to be deployed with their spouses. Instead, I rented a car and drove back to Kansas City, where I'd flown out of 5 days before. The airport was shut down. I was lucky to have rented a car when I did, and I had a way back home. Others who were from other parts of the country waited in nervous anticipation for their way back home. My daughter was serving in the Army at Fort Bragg at the time. She called me and gave me my marching orders on my journey. I knew some folks at Whiteman Air Force Base, made a few calls, and was lucky to have a safe return route mapped out for me. Not everyone did. The A-10s were airborne, protecting our skies. They knew where the next potential targets most likely would be. My knuckles were white most of my drive home, and I will admit, I'm very thankful for cell phones because they helped to give me the peace on my trip. Gas jumped to over $5 per gallon, but I made it home safely, even though. Since September 11th, 2001, we have rebuilt the buildings, buried our loved ones, and erected monuments of memories. But as President George Bush said, and I quote, "A great people has been moved to defend a great nation. Terrorist attacks can shake the foundation of our biggest buildings, but they cannot touch the foundation of America. These acts shattered steel, but they cannot dent the steel of American resolve." I believe this is still true today. We all have our stories of that fateful day. I want to hear yours. The enemy destroyed the steel of the buildings, but they've not destroyed the steel of our nation. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. Throughout this morning, as Susan just said, she wants to hear your stories, and we will. You will hear remarks and reflections by those who also responded 23 years ago. That day was the day when America lost its innocence. That was the day millions of Americans found out that our homeland could be attacked. It was the day that 3,000 of our fellow Americans died. It's a day we honor. It's also the day that we found out that two oceans can no longer protect us from an enemy or an evil. It is also why we need dedicated elected officials like those here today. And I give you Southern Boone, or Boone County, the Southern Boone District Commissioner, Justin Albrecht.
Thank you so much for being here. Thank you, the fire departments that showed up, elected officials, public, and especially the United States Exercise Tiger Foundation that made this event possible today. I have before me a proclamation on Patriot Day 2023 in remembrance on the 22nd anniversary of 9/11/2001. That whereas on September 11, 2001, the American people endured a devastating terrorist attack, the deadliest ever launched against the United States on our soil, and whereas after hijacking 4 civilian airplanes, terrorists crashed 2 into the World Trade Center in New York City, 1 in the Pentagon outside of Washington, D.C., and 1 into a field in Somerset County, Pennsylvania, costing nearly 3,000 innocent souls their lives. And whereas on this, the 22nd anniversary of that fateful day, we will remember and honor all of those whose lives were lost to a senseless act of hatred, from innocents who were simply going about what had begun as a seemingly ordinary day, to those who in the aftermath of the attacks sacrificed themselves by rushing into the destruction to carry others to safety. And whereas we also recognize and honor those who in response to this tragedy put their lives and safety at risk to help in the rescue, recovery, and rebuilding efforts, including our fellow Boone Countyans who are members of the Missouri Task Force 1 at the time. And whereas in the days, weeks, months, and years that followed, the American people have continued to show a depth of strength, courage, and compassion, proving that we will not stand idle when confronted by those determined to threaten our lives and freedom. And whereas the Serve America Act, passed by Congress and enacted into law, on April 21st, 2009, recognizes September 11th as an annual national day of service and remembrance, a fitting way to pay tribute to the strength and resilience of the American people through service to our nation and our communities. And whereas this solemn day is an opportunity for all Americans to reflect and remember that through an attack meant to divide, we instead united as one nation and one family to mourn, to support, to rebuild, and to stand strong in the face of common enemies. Therefore, the Boone County Commission does hereby honor those who lost their lives in the terrorist attacks on September 11, 2001, and encourage all fellow Americans to recognize Patriot Day 2023 as a national day of service and remembrance by honoring the legacy of the heroes of 9/11/2001 through acts of service and compassion. In testimony whereof, this 11th day of September 2023, signed Kip Kendrick, Presiding Commissioner, Justin Aldred, District 1 Commissioner, Janet Thompson, District 2 Commissioner. Thank you so much, and thank you for having me.
Thank you, Justin. I also want to make sure and mention that Commissioner Janet Thompson is here. One of the City of Columbia's most dedicated and longest serving council members is with us today. And I'm very proud that in 2015, 2016, she was elected for the 6th Ward. I give you Dr. Elizabeth Betsy Peters, City of Columbia.
Good morning. Thank you for joining us today as we remember the tragic events of September 11th, 2001. Each year on this day, we take a moment to remember the lives lost. More than 20 years later, families continue to feel that loss, and first responders feel the weight of that day, especially today. That day was terrifying for each one of us to remember it. But I'm sure it was especially terrifying for those first responders at the scene and for those of us watching the events unfold around the country. Despite the uncertainty, thousands of first responders worked to save the lives of those in the Twin Towers. It's something we don't often think about, but it's in times like those that we put our trust in someone else's hands. Someone who has made sacrifices to protect the safety of others. September 11th brought a whole new meaning to that and showed the entire country and world exactly what that sacrifice means. Hearing the bells today puts into perspective how quickly everything unfolded and how quickly everything changed for those families who lost someone. I want to thank all those brave individuals who were at Ground Zero, and I want to thank our own first responders who are willing to put their lives at risk here in our community. I want to thank the United States Exercise Tiger Foundation for inviting the city to take part in this event and for allowing all of us to grieve and remember together. Thank you.
The second tower was attacked. At this point, we have with us newly elected State Representative Adrian Plank. Adrian, come on up and say a few words.
It's an honor to be here today. Thank you for organizing this event. You know, we talk about our memories and where we was at. Obviously, I was a bit younger. I was working for the Budweiser company here in town, delivering beer to the Olive Garden. I was sitting in the truck, waiting on my co-worker. He was in Olive Garden, and he was in there forever. And he finally came out to the truck, and I said, "Where you been?" I tried texting him and all this other stuff, and he says, "Well, the Twin Towers got hit by a plane." And of course, I didn't believe him. And with that brief story, we all have those instances where we're going to remember where we were at in such a tragic day, where lives were lost, American lives were lost. And the dedication to our firefighters, not just our firefighters, our police forces, National Guard, all the people who are active in helping people overcome what had just happened. And I just think it's important to have memories flow in places like this, and just to show our commitment to our firefighters, our people of service who put their lives in danger. It's one thing to have a barbecue outside the fire station, knowing that in a few hours you may be in a dangerous situation. As a state elected official, a newly state elected official, I want you to understand that as a legislator, we're going to support you any way we can. It takes money, it takes resources to be safe in the jobs that you do. And my commitment to you is to support you any way that I can at the state capitol. And I honestly think that that's a bipartisan issue. Doesn't matter what side of the aisles you land on. It won't be hard to get the support you need, especially with folks like me and the delegation out of Columbia, to help support you in your endeavors in protecting people. And so I just want to thank everybody for being here. Thank you for the dedication and the instances where you have to put your lives at risk that most people don't have to deal with every day. So thank you. Thank you for being here. I appreciate the time.
Thank you, Adrian. And to piggyback on that thought, our veterans, our warriors, our police, our fire, no one bleeds red or blue, they just bleed red. So, and we deal with both sides of the aisle, and I think your reflection on that was very appropriate, and thank you for that. 23 years ago, I was sleeping when my mother came to tell me planes are hitting our buildings. I looked out the window thinking she meant Piper Cubs or some small aircraft hit next door. I watched the TV and saw the horror unfold. In minutes, my phone rang, informing that I needed to head to the U.S. Coast Guard Air Station to assume public affairs officer duty. Then the phone rang from some military officers around the country to tell me that they just went on alert. At the air station, senior officers were very grim. They had already been briefed and said that we were on a war footing. Because we were at a U.S. Air Force Air Guard base, F-16 fighters were being armed with missiles right before they took off. By 1 p.m., they left the hangars already armed. Our Coast Guard helicopters took 500 pounds of morphine to New York City in the opening minutes and hours of the attack. If you think of 500 pounds, that's a lot of morphine and pain medicine. Unfortunately, hardly any of it was used because of the devastating loss of 3,000 citizens and then the 400 firefighters. This is a brief portion of my reflections that day. Now we have some of Mid-Missouri's top fire chiefs with us, a few of which deployed within hours of the attacks. Others had roles in state in support of those heading east. Our first chief up is Chuck Leak, Assistant Chief, Training Bureau Director with Boone County Fire Protection District and Task Force 1. Chuck?
Thank you all. I want to thank USTF for putting this ceremony together. Tuesday, September 11th, 2001, I was over here at AJ's Automotive waiting on my wife to come out. We just dropped her car off. I'm ready to go. This is another day in our lives. It's just another day. But we had trained since 1995 with Missouri Task Force 1, and trained for a possible mission. We trained about potentials for different kind of things that we could deploy for within the United States. Never once did I think when that first plane hit that we'd be going to New York City. The second plane hit. I got a telephone call from Scott Olson at the Boone County Fire Protection District saying, hey, we need to come in and start getting stuff ready. By noon, Missouri Task Force 1 had received orders from the Federal Emergency Management Agency to deploy to New York City on 9/11. By later that afternoon, we're at Whiteman Air Force Base, loading up all this equipment into Arkansas National Guard C-130s. That evening, that night, when we're flying from McGuire Air Force Base to McGuire Air Force Base, from Mount Noster all the way over to McGuire Air Force Base, I'm looking out the window, and I'm not seeing the usual contrails in the sky. There wasn't many clouds in the sky, a big bright moon shining. All I saw was 2 fighter aircraft off either wing of this C-130 flying over the United States of America. As a Navy corpsman with 3rd Battalion, 4th Marines, I realized what that meant, what this nation was getting itself into, and what had just happened to us. It was the 13th before I ever saw a video of what the towers looked like as they were falling. And I was ankle deep in it. I could talk a lot about the men and women that responded, and I'm proud of all 62 members of Missouri Task Force 1 that answered the call. Just as we do every day, we answer the call when 9/11, 911 is dialed, we'll respond. We did that day as well. I could talk a little bit, but what I want to talk about was what struck me the most is the American people. People like you all. Every day when we went to work, there were thousands of people holding up signs saying, thank you, you're our heroes. We pray for you. Every day they were there waving at us. They weren't protesting. They were thanking us for coming from Missouri. And remember, Missouri Task Force 1 is your team, your state team. Kansas City, St. Louis, Springfield, Branson, and right here in Columbia and Boone County. We were answered the call. But these people were there every day to thank us. American people will stand up every time. Susan, you mentioned Shanksville. We don't hold ourselves out as heroes. We're very uncomfortable with the term of hero. We do a job that we're dedicated our lives to do. And yet, on Flight 93, a bunch of people just like you all, doctors, engineers, teachers, students, realized what was happening, and they said, no, it will not happen. You will not use this plane. You will not hurt another American citizen. If it means our lives, we'll do it. They weren't Army Rangers. They weren't Marines. They weren't Navy SEALs. They were people just like you all that stepped up and said, let's roll. And those brave terrorists were so afraid of those mean Americans pounding on that cabin door that they crashed that plane in Shanksville, so the Americans wouldn't get to them and stop them. God bless those people. To me, those are the truest heroes of 9/11. The 343 firefighters of FDNY and the countless other police officers that died that day, they did their jobs. They did it in the faith of the men and women that were behind them, the men and women that were right there climbing those stairs with them, and to try to get as many of those people out as they could. The American people will always step up. You all prove that in floods and anything else that happened in this community. You won't give each other the time of day, on every other day, but when something happens to your brothers and sisters, you will step up every time. And God bless Americans for that. And then when we get back, what do we get back to? Thousands of people lining the streets. 62 flags flying in front of Boone County Fire headquarters. The American people will always step up. And you can have faith in the fact that the men and women of the fire service, EMS, Missouri Task Force 1, we will answer the call every time, just like we did 22 years ago. We will stand up and do whatever it takes to take care of the incident. So, again, thank you all very much. And as you see the memorial over here, thank you.
From the Columbia Fire Department, I present you Clayton Farr, Jr., Chief of the Department, City of Columbia. Chief Farr.
Good morning and thank you. Thank you for Exercise Tiger for putting this event together. Thank you to all of us who've come out this morning. I wasn't quite prepared to speak, but certainly reflections of that day 22 years ago was just any average day. I was working busily in a fire marshal's capacity when we were notified that we needed to come back to fire headquarters. Something was happening. Never could we have possibly imagined what was happening was happening. So I've heard change discussed a bit this morning. Those events that morning changed the way we view our jobs. They changed the way we view danger, and they changed the way we train, the way we think, and the way we operate. But one of those things with all of that change that has not occurred is our dedication to serving you, our community, and serving the world. We thank our members from Task Force 1 who've responded to represent us well. But for those of us who did not have the opportunity to go to New York City, we knew that we had to serve here locally, and we did so, and we continue to do so with pride and honor each day. So again, thank you to all of you who have come today, and thank you as well to all of our first responders who are here today. Thank you.
Chief Jenkins, Columbia Fire Department Assistant Chief.
Good morning, and I want to thank you for bringing this together, because we say we will never forget. We will never forget. There's communities hosting events just like this today to honor everybody that was involved in that tragic day. For me, I was a company officer at Columbia Fire. I had just gotten off duty, ran home, showered, and I was also a volunteer firefighter for the Boone County Fire Protection District. I had a meeting to go to that morning, so I went to that meeting, and I was talking to Deputy Chief Jeff Scott of the Boone County Fire District, and I'd left his office and was coming back, and he said, oh my gosh, they've had a plane crash into one of the towers in New York. And I was like, oh really, things do happen, But as we were sitting there talking and kind of watching it live on TV, and then a second plane hit. And we both just looked back and was like, this is no accident. This is real. And it's like, my gosh, how does someone fly two aircrafts into two big buildings? I mean, that's not an accident. So then it started transpiring into, okay, our country's under attack. And, a lot of things, Chief Leake talked about Missouri Task Force 1 and getting that spun up. I was there helping with that and getting things ready to go, because it was real. And out the door, need to get to Whiteman to get Task Force 1 headed that way. So a lot of moving parts. So we're doing the convoy to Whiteman Air Force Base. Our former governor, Roger Wilson, was there supporting the mission as well. And I got the honor to help escort him to Whiteman Air Force that day, and having conversations with him and and, you know, talking about what was happening and how, you know, our country is under attack, but our country will step up. You know, that was evident by the remarks of President Bush. You know, they wanted to take President Bush. He was at a school reading to kids, and they wanted to, you know, they come in there, we got to go, and wanted to take him to a protective facility. And our president stepped up and said, no, take me to the White House. We're not going to let the terrorists ruin our country. So that's what we're about too. The fire service has that same mentality. You know, we're going to do whatever it takes in time of need to protect our citizens. We've got great men and women in the fire service, law enforcement, the military that step up every day. We've had several members from the Columbia Fire Department that have been or still are very active members of Missouri Task Force 1, as other fire departments and other people through engineers, physicians that support that team. So we thank Task Force for all they do, and we thank you for the support you give us, because without that support, you know, we're not able to do what we need to do. You know, that day was a day of a normal day, and then things changed. So that, and you know, talk about how it changed our daily operations. You know, our fire stations are open, doors are open, but then we were told lock everything down because nobody really knew what the next attacks were going to be on us. So everybody hunkered down, but we still had to go out on the street and do our duties. And our men and women in all those branches of the law enforcement, EMS, fire, military stepped up. Our citizens, as Chief Leake said, stepped up. And that's what makes our country so powerful, is we've got good people that step up when we need to. So thank you, and again, thank you for being here and supporting us. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Jenkins. I'm going to call up from the Southern Boone Fire Protection District, Chief James Bullard. I'm going to call up Colin, his deputy chief, with him. They're a pair. You'll speak independent, but I think you came as a team. Let's introduce you as a team from the Southern District.
Well, thank you for being here. Thank you for inviting us. Thank you for organizing this. My recollection of that day is I had left Columbia Fire Station 6. I was on my way home from work, and it came on the news that a plane hit the tower. And I'm like, how bad a pilot? Must have been some guy doing a stunt that had an accident. I had no idea till I got to my brother's house. He met me in the driveway and said the second tower hit. I had no clue that anybody would ever have the audacity to attack our country, but they did. And yes, it has changed. Everything we did, everything we do is different than it was before. It has changed everything. Some things we have learned to do better, but we are not the same happy-go-lucky country after that, because it was an injury. And the entire country has stepped up and not let it affect us. Colin.
Thank you for having us here. My name's Colin Wright. I'm the Deputy Fire Chief, Southern Boone. Unlike a lot of the chiefs that are speaking, September of 2001, I was a senior in high school here in Columbia at Hickman High School. Obviously, this was the most major event that had ever occurred in my entire life. And for students, especially those going into their senior year, it changed a lot of things. If you were going to join the military, you were going to war. If you were going to go into emergency services, you knew that death was a possibility. Well, for me, for the past 3 years, the most important thing in my life had been spending every possible moment riding on fire trucks at the City of Columbia Fire Explorer program. And I was blessed my senior year to have an internship with the Boone County Fire Protection District. For my entire senior year, I got to spend time with folks that responded to the towers. Later, I actually got to live with one of my roommates, also responded. I learned a lot from these gentlemen. Obviously, by now, I've spent most of my life working in emergency services. It's really hard to explain to folks the amount of times that crews spend together, but I often describe it like this. I spend more time with my coworkers than I do with my wife. From this, we obviously spend a lot of time on important occasions, good times, birthdays, holidays, but we also spend a lot of time together for sad days, death of family members, your kids growing up. Oftentimes it seems like you're not there for it. We process all these events together, those of us that work in emergency services, and we have to do it together because if you haven't lived it, it's hard to explain it to somebody else. At work, a lot of times I find the best times for me are coffee in the back of the bay. That's where a lot of lessons are told, a lot of history is shared. And a lot of times during this is when I kind of think back to September 11th. I think about the New York fire crews having coffee in the back of the bay, sharing their lessons, sharing their stories. Now, we're never going to learn their stories or their lessons now because they were lost to us. But I just ask that when you guys are having coffee, especially in the back of the bay, you take time to remember the sacrifice that they did. So, thank you.
Thank you, Chief Fuller, Deputy Chief Wright. One of the things that Colin failed to mention was that Chief Jenkins was saying how they did the convoys to Whiteman to load equipment and pallets and everything. As a young high schooler, he helped to load some of those pallets and took part already in that. And we want to thank him for that support to that mission. From our capital city to the south, we're honored to have Chief Matt Schofield, Chief of the Department, Jefferson City Fire. Chief.
Well, good morning. I really didn't anticipate talking this morning. In fact, if you know Chief Jenkins, that guy can talk, and I was hoping he would just talk for about 15, 20 more minutes so I might not have to. But you let me down, Chief. But I do appreciate the opportunity to come and talk with you today. It's not something I talk about very often. It's just not something I really like talking about. But so I was a second-year firefighter in Jefferson City on September the 11th, but I was on my days off. And as you know how the schedule works, you work 24-hour shifts, and so I was off duty that day, but I was at the volunteer firehouse in Boone County with a lot of my my peers there who were also on the task force and have been training for quite some time. And so what people don't really remember maybe is that at that time the task force really had not had a major federal deployment. So we had been training for a long time. I'd been training with the team for about 5 years. And so there were people that said, you know, what are you doing? Why are you spending all this time training? What's the deal? You know, you guys never go anywhere. You never do anything. You just spend all this time training. And it seems like, you know, there should be some sort of outcome, some sort of mission, some sort of deployment. And so a lot of those naysayers, you know, they kind of came and went on the team. They decided that it really wasn't for them, that maybe it wasn't really worth it. You know, to spend all those time and hours and time away from family and blood, sweat, and tears training for a mission that might not ever come. And so, you know, it was interesting for me. That day, I was with my coworkers, or my fellow volunteers, also task force members, and we watched the first plane hit, and we're like, you know, that's interesting. And we all kind of gathered around the TV, and we're like, wonder what that's about. And then when the second plane hit, we're like, okay, this is different. This is real. And we knew at that time there were 28 teams in the system. We knew that Texas had just gotten in, you know, because remember we had a president from Texas, and we knew that of those 28 teams in the system, they were going to need all 28. And we're like, you know, between the Pentagon and between New York City, we thought, wonder which one we might be going to. And then even between our team here, we have 3 groups. We have red, white, and blue. And we thought to ourselves, okay, there's 3 deep. There's 3 people for every one position, right? So if 62 get to go, who will get to go and who won't? And that was a big topic of conversation. But at that point, we didn't know. We're like, we got to get down there. We got to get to headquarters. We got to get all the stuff ready. We had to bring stuff from the truck that was at Station 1 at Boone County to get it all ready. And so we just thought to ourselves, you know, we're just going to get down there. We're going to just make sure we have all the things we need. A lot of us had been training for many years. Some of us had trained in multiple positions. And we thought, well, maybe that'll help my chances. You know, if I can go as two different discipline-specific training positions, maybe that will help. And that was kind of the strategy, you know, was to prove our usefulness, prove our worth, to be able to get that, you know, that go. And so I guess that's what I would share with you is I just felt fortunate. I felt blessed. I felt that I was able to represent all of you and all of them. That's what I would share with you.
Thank you, Chief. One of the hardest jobs is that of fire marshal. And with that, we have with us Tim Bean, the state fire marshal of all of Missouri. Tim, Chief.
Well, good morning. It is an honor to be here on this sacred ground. It's a lovely memorial, and you know, I was just thinking back, looking at some of the names here on this memorial and the people who have sacrificed their lives to serve and protect our nation, and for that I'm very thankful. So thank you for having us here today. I just want to say thank you to our Missouri Fire Service. We have 814 fire departments that represent our state, across our state, and about 20,000 plus firefighters that serve our state day in and day out. And for that, I'm humbled and honored to be their state fire marshal and represent our Missouri Fire Service and be present here today. I was just thinking back and listening to these beautiful comments from my fellow firefighters and chiefs, where they were at and what they were doing on that day. And at that time, I was a fire chief down in West Plains, Missouri. Anybody know where West Plains is? Howell County. And I was serving there in the capacity of fire chief. And I was shaving in my bathroom at my home there. When one of my men called and says, "Hey, Chief, are you watching the TV?" And I said, "No." He says, "Well, there's something going on in New York City. A plane has hit a tower, and a lot of devastation, and you might want to get around and get in here because we don't know where this is going." And by the time I got to the station, the second plane had hit, and like many of my other first responders, our eyes were glued on the TV and just strategizing in our minds where we were going and what we'd be doing in the days to follow. And history was laid out there that day in America. And, you know, some things came to my mind that to reflect back on that. And I have like 3 or 4 B's here that came to my mind. At that moment, America bent, did we not? A lot of people, a lot of things were changed in a moment's time. And we felt vulnerable maybe a little bit at the time, and so we bent a little bit. But, you know, what I thought was ironic was what the unified approach, we went to our knees, we bent our knees to prayer, right? There was a lot of people that were praying. As the chiefs alluded to, people were praying for our first responders, for our fellow Americans that was affected that day. And somebody mentioned it earlier, we had a lot of burials. We had 343 firefighters perish that day in that one event. And for that, I just can't imagine. I've been to New York City several times. I've been to the memorial site now is created. We've had different responders from New York City come to Missouri and speak at different events, and to listen to them describe that day and what all was taking place. I just know in our day-to-day activities as chiefs, when an event breaks out, your mind, you start processing, you start strategizing and your tactics and all this. I just couldn't believe, I just can't believe what went through their minds during that day. And so we buried a lot of different people that day. But what I appreciated, I guess, about it is we've rebuilt. From that day forward, everybody has stepped up. America, I feel, is stronger. And it's good to have days like today that we can sit here and reflect and recognize and never forget those people that sacrificed their lives that day serving and protecting their community. So in closing, I just want to say, God bless America. Thank you.
After our third bell, the chiefs that have not put a patch over will put the patch on the fallen warrior. And then Susan, Bill, and our vice chair of the board, Dave Rathel, will take part in presenting the 9/11 bronze medal to those that are nominated. The fallen warrior shows, I think, another echoing on what has been said of the finest in man's humanity. Nothing's more noble than to carry your pal, your friend, or a stranger from danger in harm's way. This 80-pound stone casting is based on real events. Afghanistan was our longest war. We can do no less to honor our warriors who went into harm's way because of what happened today, 22 years ago. We honor their sacrifice as we honor all who died this day. The Pentagon is hit. At this time, Susan and staff will please come forward over to the awards table, and we'll go ahead. We're going to go ahead and do that, and from there, we're going to go ahead and do our wreath presentation that'll be brought over here. Let me have Chief Chuck Lee, Matt Schofield, Jerry Jenkins, Deputy Chief Holland. I can now have at this time, if I can have our chiefs, our elected officials, Susan, we're all going to go head over here to the REITs.